Mark is contractually obligated to say that last part there. I also love that he said best looking, and some of you laughed before I even got out here, so I'm feeling really sure of myself right now. Worst job you've ever had. You have to think about it. Probably is not hard to conjure it to mind right now. The worst job you've ever had. Think about it. Could be the job you currently have. If you're a parent, it's okay to say, well, there's parts of parenting that is like the worst job I've ever had. If you're a student, it's like the worst class you've ever taken. Okay, I want you to take a few seconds. I want you to share that with a neighbor. Worst job you've ever had. Go ahead, tell somebody. I hear some crying. Make sure the other person has a chance. This is not therapy. Okay, I want you to just soak in that. Soak in the experience. Put yourself back on that horrible shift that you had, graveyard shift of the worst job, working with the most annoying people and the most passive-aggressive boss you've ever had, like whatever that was for you. For me, it's kind of hard to narrow it down. I've had a lot of jobs that I'm glad I don't have anymore. I started working when I was 12. That was my first paid job, and I taught karate at 12, and I taught little kids. Not the most rewarding thing I've ever done. I remember working at Coco's, and fine enough restaurant, but I worked in a community of, I still have the pink polo shirt. I worked in a community of people who thought it was generous to give me a tip of $1. So I'd work my tail off, and then that's what I would get at the end of each table. One of the worst days I can ever remember on a job was when I worked construction in college, and this one day, I was out in Palm Desert working on this housing development. It was 123 degrees outside, and we were laying asphalt, which is over 200 degrees. And my job, because I didn't have a whole lot of skills at the moment, was that guy that was stop, go, traffic. The only shade I had was a hard hat, because you have to wear the hard hat even if all you're doing is stop, go with traffic. I'm not making this up. My supervisor came by one time to give me a lukewarm Gatorade. That was the only break that I got. Horrible. We've all had jobs or tasks or chores that we didn't love. But when I was invited by Mark to talk about the best advice my dad has ever given me, I think about my dad. I think about work. And so that's where my mind immediately went to. And now you're thinking, great, the one day off I have from work, I go to church and we talk about work. But I promise you, if you leverage this one idea that I want to give you today, this one piece of advice that I got from my dad, it has the possibility, at least, of making your Monday just as liberating as your Sunday, making your Monday just as exhilarating as your Sunday, making your Monday just as powerful as your Sunday. But you have to apply the one principle I'm about to share with you. And I think it's important because your work takes up a lot of your life. On average, the only thing that we spend more of our lives doing than work is sleeping. So if you can enhance your work life, you can enhance your life. I'm an executive coach now. That's the work that I do. And I love working with my clients, and we increase revenue and all that kind of stuff, of course. But the reason I'm passionate about my work is because the primary focus of my work is to not just help people create big, beautiful things, but to create big, beautiful lives. Because so often we rack up achievement while diminishing our souls. We achieve more and more and more and more and become less and less and less and less. And some of you feel that grind today. And I want to raise the urgency with you and with my clients around the relationship we have with work. And one of the ways that I do that, I raise the urgency, is I talk about the 100,000-hour principle. Some of you have heard about the 10,000-hour principle. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about it. The idea behind that is if you spend 10,000 hours doing something, you can develop a bit of mastery of that thing. Some of you have a mastery of a skill that you learn. Maybe it's on the job, or maybe it's in some other part of a hobby that you have, and you've done 10,000 hours of this thing, and you're better than most people at it. So that's a good idea. That's a helpful idea. I talk about the 100,000-hour rule. And the 100,000-hour rule leverages the idea that we generally spend, most people, at least in the West, we spend 100,000 hours of our lives working. Like I said, the only thing that you do more than work is sleep. So if we can enhance the relationship we have, or what we get from, or how we show up at work, we don't just create more opportunities for ourselves, we actually create different lives. But it all comes from the role that you think work is supposed to play in your life. Some of you today, you think that work, the role it plays in the movie of your life, is the villain. It's the necessary evil. It's something that you have to endure, maybe just the annoying little brat, but you have to endure this thing to get something that you want, right? To put a roof over your head or food on the table. And if that's the role that work plays in your life today, I do not blame you for showing up tomorrow with resistance, maybe even hatred, rejection, exhaustion, because work is out to take from you before it gives to you. Others of us, the role that work plays in our lives is something, I think, even more insidious than that. But it looks better, it's more socially acceptable. Work is what tells you who you are and what you're worth. The more you achieve, the more you're worth. And if I'd only paid attention to what impression I got of my dad early on, that's what I would have thought Dad was telling me about work. That's what I would have thought was his Dadvice about work. Because my earliest memories of my dad was him getting up in the morning, putting a tie on, going to the office, coming home from work, changing into yard work clothes, going out and working in the yard, and then finally sitting down, plopping himself in a chair at dinner time to spend time with us as a family. And so I would have assumed that what Dad was showing more than telling was, hey, work is what tells you who you are and what you're worth. Like, you're not worth anything if you ain't working hard. And I think about my dad. My dad is a hard worker. And I would have thought maybe the role that work plays in your life, it's supposed to play, is that it tells you who you are and what you're worth. And if that's the role, honestly, that work functionally plays in your life, then when you succeed, it has a tendency to go to your head. I must be more powerful. I must be more valuable. Of course, then, that has a dark side, because when you fail or you fall short of what you want, you don't get the grade, then it breaks your heart. But is there a role that work can play in our lives that actually feeds our lives? It didn't always for me. In fact, I would say up until recently, work did not play that role in my life. Just a few years ago, I was on a date with my wife. We went to the movies, which we love to do. And we got about 5 minutes into this movie, and the next thing I remember was all the lights on in the movie theater and everybody in the movie theater looking at me. And I looked down, and my shirt had a V of sweat on it. I looked next to me, and my wife is shaking. Now, what she would tell you is her experience was we're 5 minutes into a movie, and she starts to see me jitter a little bit in her periphery. And then she looks over at me, and I'm showing symptoms of what she thought was a seizure. Like, my body was seizing up, my eyes rolled back in my head. And my wife, in those situations, by the way, she is like, definitely go to battle with my wife, because she is like, calm, do the next right thing. She yells for a manager. Is there a doctor in the house? She puts her hand in my mouth so I don't bite my tongue, and she's just like on the job until she realizes everything's fine. And then, like most people, then the emotions of the experience start to take over. But in that moment, man, she was just steady. She's calling my name, trying to wake me out of this thing that I was going through. I was taken out of the movie theater on a stretcher. In fact, I think we've got an image of it. Yeah, so this is me date night with my wife. Yeah, glad you're laughing about it. Look at me. I do wear a mask very well. I mean, Mark's right. I'm a good-looking guy. Look at that dude. But I go to the emergency room, and they run all these tests. Long story short, we're in the room at the end, and the attending physician comes in. He's like, well, we figured it out. You have a slight potassium deficiency. You're overworked, so you had some adrenal problems. And then he had to add this in front of my wife. He's like, and maybe the movie was a little intense for you. I was like, bro, you should know we have like an unspoken contract here. You don't say that in front of a guy's wife. But he did, and my wife will always have that to hang on to. Was the movie a little intense for you, Joey? But I was overworked. And I wish I could tell you that was the wake-up call, but it took a series of decisions for me to begin to have not just less work. That's not what I mean. is to reallocate my attention and my energy in a way that took life back from and fed life into work. I want to give you that concept today. I want to give you the thing that will make or break the experience you have of work, and thus, I think, the experience you will have of life. I'm going to extract this one principle, and I promise you, if you apply this to your life, this is going to give you your greatest opportunities in life and in work. Absolutely. I'm going to introduce an idea that's going to unlock what you're capable of at work. It's going to make you far more employable. It's going to make you a more desirable member of your team. You're going to be the first pick for more authority and more responsibility. If you are somebody who supervises people or has authority in your job occupationally over people, this is going to make you a better boss. People will love showing up to work with you. You will keep teams longer. Attrition will be reduced. I promise this one concept has the power to do that. So why is this a church conversation? I thought you'd never ask. Nobody was asking. But the whole Bible, where we get our ideas of what God is like, if you trust the Bible, I'm not assuming you do, but if this tells us anything about God, we are first introduced to a God at work. If the God of the Bible is the God that exists, then our God is a God of work, a God at work. In the Jewish scriptures, in the first few sentences, the first few paragraphs of this, in Genesis 2:2, here's what it says. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. This is how we are introduced to the God of creation, the God that manufactured you and all of nature. And one of the things I love about Torah, which is the Jewish scriptures, some of you call it the Old Testament, one of the things I love about this is it introduces the idea that I've gotten so much life out of, that the human species is unique among all of creation, all of nature, in that we uniquely are able to reflect what God is like. That's pretty cool. But what that means in terms of work is if our God is a God of work, he is a working God, then that means if we reflect his nature, then we, even in our perfect state, are built to work. We are born to work. You're like, ugh. That's not necessarily bad news. You were born to work. It's a part of perfect human existence. A few sentences later in verse 15, it says, the Lord God took a human, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. Another translation of the Hebrew text there says to cultivate it, to nurture it, put us in a garden to begin to work alongside him to produce life. You are uniquely able to create the future of something, to change the course of events of history, to work outside of your instincts, to create something that wasn't there before, to harvest, to utilize raw materials in a way that no other species on the planet can do it. We are not just here. We certainly have the power to destroy it and to consume it, and there's signs of that certainly throughout our history, but we are uniquely able to build and to cultivate and to grow and to prune and to nurture and to design and to create in our perfect human existence. We are born to work. I almost called this sermon, Take This Job and Love It, but I thought I'd lose all of you, which I probably just did. But I really want to make a case for work and how beautiful it possibly is in your life and to your soul. It might discourage some of you, especially if you think that work is a necessary evil, but I actually think not only is work a part of your perfect existence, I think you will be working forever. I do. I think there will be a moment, there will be a chapter of our lives that moves beyond brokenness and tedium and needing to work, and the only thing left will be the desire to do it. I actually think in eternity, you don't have to agree with me, but I think in eternity, we're still going to be building, and we're still going to be writing jokes and telling new stories and painting and sculpting. I think we're going to be working for eternity. And part of it, I think, is because we were created not to just work as a reflection of God. I think you are a work of God created to work with God. I think it gives him great pleasure when you join him in what only he can do. Even if you don't believe that there's a God, think about this. It makes sense. Everything that we do, everything that we drive, Every job that you get to participate in, every class that you take is working with raw materials that you got outside of your control. Photosynthesis and decomposition and reproduction, the circle of life, all of that, outside of your control. You did nothing to have that raw material available to you, and yet everything that we create, manufacture, put together, this iPad, everything was based on a raw material that was provided for us in existence. So it tracks, if there is a God behind all of that, that every work that we do is a partnership with him, whether you like it or not. You desperately need, even the abilities and the talents and the air in your lungs is something that was beyond your control. You bring all of that to the work that you do. So I wonder if part of a clue to how to bring more life into your work and get life from your work is just an understanding that not only were you born for it, you're going to be doing it forever, but there's a partnership with a divine creator who loves you and knows what you're capable of. So you were born not only to work, you are a work of God, created to work with God. So how does this apply, and how does this redeem the 100,000 hours? Really practical. There's a principle that Paul, who started a bunch of churches 2,000 years ago, we actually have some correspondence still that we can read to this day, letters that were written between leaders of these churches. It's pretty cool that we can still read this stuff. 2,000 years later, and there's this excerpt from a letter written to a church in a city called Colossae. And this excerpt from this letter talks about how to redeem the 100,000 hours. Here's how to get life out of work and how to put life into work. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. And in the Greek, the original language, whatever means whatever. Whatever you do. 123 degrees laying asphalt, work at it with all your heart. Parenting, work at it with all your heart. Trigonometry, work at it with all your heart. Raking the leaves, work at it with. It's an invitation, by the way. In the language, it's a command, but a lot of the commands, especially in the Jesus biographies and the correspondence of the early churches, in the original language, it's like an invitation. It's a command you can disobey. But there's an invitation to something more. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as with this mindset, working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you'll receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. There's something that will extend beyond your tenure, that will remain, an artifact of how you have worked, that will linger into eternity. It is the Lord Christ you are serving, even if on the org chart you've got a supervisor. Work as though you are working for a bigger boss. Working for a different master than your manager. And some of you are like, praise Jesus, I could work for a different boss than my manager. Yeah. There's a better boss available to you than your customers. There's a better boss available to you than your kids. Ha 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 ha. Wouldn't that be great? There's a better boss available to you than your spouse, as wonderful as that might be. A better boss available to you than your manager, your supervisor, your shareholders. There's a better boss available to you. And deciding to work for, showing up as if you are reporting ultimately to that boss, absolutely changes your experience of work and your opportunity coming from work. I promise you. So what if you are really, when you wake up in the morning, you are really working for a boss who not only created you and knows what you're capable of, but loves you. Loves you and wants to give you more life, wants to give you more opportunity, wants to enhance the impact that you have in other people's lives. What if that's your real boss? It might make it a little bit easier to get up in the morning, if that's who ultimately you're reporting to. There's something that transcends the org chart. There's something that transcends the org chart and the bottom line. There's something that transcends HR. There's something that transcends the report card. Do they do report cards anymore in school? They call them that, even though it's probably all digital. It's like report screens. Is that what they call it now? There's something. You want to know why we sing so many songs when you come to church? If you're like me, I think I'm naturally kind of a skeptic. I'm like, this is weird. Why are we doing? And I'm a musician. I love it. But it's okay. You don't have to turn off your brains. There's a really logical, powerful reason why we sing so many songs. What a gift we have, an opportunity to sing and to hear the poetry of these words and to be absorbed into these melodies. Here's what this is for. These are anthems that remind us that there is more than our circumstances when it's so easy to forget that. You have 6 days a week where it seems like all you've got is your circumstances. You come here and you sing about a God who loves you more than your boss. A God who is willing to give you another chance. A God who is willing to resurrect something that feels dead right now. That's why we sing these songs, because I need to remember something I'm so quick to forget. And that same idea has the power to make your Mondays just as powerful as your Sundays. Your Mondays just as liberating as your Sundays. This is the difference it's going to make. And this, by the way, is the real advice that my dad gave me. Who it's for determines how it's done. Who it's for, I can hear his voice saying this, who it's for determines how it's done. Several years ago, I wasn't living at home anymore. I went back and visited my folks, and my dad was working. He was out at the office, and I went to the back of their house, and my mom was upset, clearly upset. So I got curious about that, what was going on. And it wasn't really surprising because we just found out that Dad had to declare bankruptcy. And maybe some of you have gone through that. Maybe you're facing it right now, and that's very jarring, especially if, remember, I thought maybe Dad's advice was work tells you what you're worth and who you are. And if that's his mindset, then you can imagine the disorientation that happens when you have to face something like a bankruptcy. And they were going through that. And so, hey, Mom, why are you so upset? And she said, well, yeah, it's that. Some of the challenges, the restrictions, the life changes that we're going to have to go through for that. Yep. She said, but I'm so proud of your dad. Which was wonderful to hear. And I was like, oh, you're a great wife. But I was like, what an odd time to say that. And she's like, no, you don't understand why we're facing a bankruptcy right now. And do you want to know why? I was like, yeah, sure. And she said, well, never tell your dad I'm telling you this. So as long as he doesn't listen to this message online, I've kept the promise so far. I could tell everybody else. She said, well, one of your dad's associates, my dad's a financial planner, and she said one of your dad's associates was running a Ponzi scheme and bilked people out of thousands of dollars, including some of your dad's clients. And some of them lost their entire life savings. So they were facing retirement. They thought, great, we've got this nest egg, gone. Plans changed, shattering. And it was not Dad's fault. It's just somebody he was associated with. And that guy ended up getting indicted, and he had to spend years in prison. But the money's gone. The money's been spent, and they can sell some of his assets. But it's going to pay back a modicum of what people invested with this guy. And she said, your dad has decided that he wanted to take from his own resources and from work he could produce to offset the loss that some of these clients had suffered. Even though that was not his legal responsibility to do that, he just decided to do it and put him in a position. I'm not sure if he was to look back now, he might have changed some of his choices in there. But the motivation, I know, for my dad is intact. He decided to do that because it was never about the money for my dad. And he's had plenty, and he's had nothing. But he would tell you that who it's for determines how it's done. And he saw that there was people behind the headlines and these stories. And he wanted to do everything he could, everything he knew how to do to try and serve those people. But that's not the who that it was for my father. It's not. The reason that he wanted to serve those people is because he's a follower of Jesus. This is the part my dad would absolutely tell you, is Jesus, he realizes, has given so much to give my dad life that he is just following the example of his real boss to give so much to give other people a chance at life. The best dadvice I've ever gotten is that who it's for determines how it's done. And so not only does that give you some different awareness and perspective as you go into your work life, I actually think it creates your greatest opportunities in your career and in your relational life. I promise you it does, that mindset. This is how Monday becomes just as powerful as Sunday. Practically, this means so much. I cannot encourage you enough to get a better boss. Even if your boss right now is awesome, get a better one. I tell my clients all the time, you have the power to choose your boss, so choose wisely. Choose one that loves you. Choose one that is an incredible example of character and of compassion and of love. A boss that inspires you to live as a more free human. A boss that is not grading you, but a boss that gives you grace. That's his orientation towards you. A boss that only sees future when he looks at you, does not see past. Get a better boss. And for Jesus followers, what I'm not saying is there's like a Christian way to make a latte if you're a barista. I suppose you could like foam art like the face of Jesus or something but no, that's not what I mean. But I do think that there's a way that Jesus would lead us to interact with an angry manager. I do think there is a way that Jesus would lead us to interact with a demanding customer. I think there's a way that Jesus would lead us to budget, and a way that Jesus would lead us to do performance reviews and grant opportunity and to notice the person left out and kept out. I think there's a way that Jesus would lead us to create content and artistic expression to provide beauty in the world. I think there's a way that the real boss creates real life in the real world, and this is how you redeem the 100,000 hours. Get a better boss, because who it's for determines how it's done. It is so hard for us to do good work for a bad boss. It is tough. It's tough to get up in the morning knowing that the boss that you're going to report to has no vision. It's tough waking up in the morning and reporting to a boss that just is passive aggressive. It's hard reporting to a boss that is demanding and never encouraging, a boss that just doesn't see you and see what you're capable of. So it's time to choose a better boss. What if you never had to show up for a bad boss again? Not really. Even if in the org chart you have a supervisor or a manager, someone in practical authority over you, what if you show up with a different boss? A boss that is demanding that you never compromise your values, no matter what industry standard is. What if that was your real boss? What if your real boss was telling you to focus on the people more than just the profits and the products that you're creating? What if that's what your real boss was demanding of you? What if your real boss was telling you that there's more to life than just the 9 to 5, so it's okay to have some boundaries, even if it seems the only way that you could get promoted or that you could get ahead is by pulling all of the extra hours? What if you just trusted your real boss enough to say that you can say no? What if your real boss demands that you bring more creativity and compassion to your job than the job requires? What kind of opportunities would that take? What kind of opportunities would that create for you? See, the bottom line here is who it's for determines how it's done. And I want to add to that concept, how it's done matters more than what you do. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. Because who it's for determines how it's done, and how you do the work that you do matters so much more than what you do. Some of you just start by being a better boss to yourself. Just start there. Some of you, you're horrible leaders of yourself. Just imagine if you, you 5 years from now is the boss that you're reporting to tomorrow. Would the you 5 years from now look back and say, man, I'm so glad that that's how you decided to show up. I'm so glad that that's the opportunity that you decided to seize. I'm so glad that that's the courage you decided to exercise. That's the extra mile you decided to run. What if that was your real boss? But for a lot of us, we've got an even greater boss to serve. If you're in an industry that's used to cutting corners and skimming a little bit off the top and cheating customers, remember that you are a citizen of a greater life, of a kingdom, before you are an employee of a corporation. If you're in a culture that demeans people, maybe there's racial profiling there, remember you serve a boss that is for every tribe and every tongue and every nation, a boss that sees every person as worth loving to death. That's my real boss. Because who it's for determines how I show up to work, and how it's done matters more than what I do. Now, if you're a Jesus follower, I hope you have the privilege of working with people who don't believe like you. It expands your thinking, it expands your compassion, but it also gives you a chance to show people what Jesus is really like, because maybe they're not aware or they've got certain paradigms and assumptions. So you have an opportunity to create an impression. Let me be honest with y'all. For a long time, still to this day, if I'm being really transparent, if I see that little Christian fish on a business card or a website, I typically will not hire that person. I'm being honest. Anybody else? Some of you are like, I have that on my website. No shade on you. Just generally speaking, I have this assumption that if I go in and they have a little Bible verse, I'm like, sweet, I hope that's life-giving, but you're probably going to do mediocre work. Or you're not going to be creative, or you're not going to follow up with me. That's been my experience. And I would say that has nothing to do with Jesus. I think that might be somebody who's hiding behind a belief to continue to perpetuate their mediocrity, to not bring their passion, to bring life to something. I'm telling you, and I don't use the word should a whole lot, it should be different if Jesus is your real boss. People that you work with or work for, people who contract you, they don't have to believe in Jesus, but man, they should really want to hire somebody who does. They should really want to work with somebody who follows Jesus. They should really want to work for somebody who follows Jesus. Because your real boss is telling you to show up tomorrow with all of the integrity and character that you can muster, all the creativity and compassion, all of the boundaries and maturity that trusting God gives you in your life and empowers you to have, all of the clarity that you can have, and who wouldn't want to be around that kind of a person more? And listen, if you're not a Jesus follower and you're listening to this message right now, I also am telling you the coolest thing about Jesus is one of the coolest things, is that he'll let you test drive all these concepts even if you don't believe he is who he claims to be. Just try it out. Try out as if Jesus was your boss. What do you think maybe he would have you do as you show up for your Monday? And don't be surprised, not in some weird karma way, but just in a very practical way. Do not be surprised if greater opportunities open up for you. Because how you do whatever it is you're doing tomorrow, somebody's watching. And that they see you show up tomorrow with that integrity and that creativity and that compassion and that patience and that noticing and that seeing and the attentiveness that you bring to it, you might be one of the first people that comes to mind when there's a new opportunity. So, how do you make Monday just as powerful as Sunday? Be humble enough to bring your best, working for your real boss, regardless of your org chart, and that is how you redeem the 100,000 hours. That's how you bring life to work and how life comes from work. The last thing I'll say as I close here is that you also have a chance, as you practice this principle, to communicate value to people. When you bring that mindset to work, you're telling people that they're worth it. And I get this straight from Jesus. The night that he was betrayed, they were practicing a Jewish Passover, a Seder feast. And that's when Jesus inaugurated communion. He flipped the script on a Passover meal. And so he's there. And customarily, what they would be used to is like Jesus, because he was the rabbi, he was the authority, he would take the head of the table, and then he would walk people through the rituals of a Passover feast, which is beautiful. If you've never participated, it's unbelievable. And that's what he would do. But before he did that, we're told in one of his biographies, all of his friends and followers sit around this table, and he decides, instead of taking the head of the table, he's going to take a knee and wash their feet. And what I believe about Jesus, because of other things he said and accomplished and the example that he lived, it was not that moment of washing these grimy feet, which was the role of a house servant should have done that. They were shocked that Jesus would have done this. The reason he did it wasn't because he thought of himself less. It was because he wanted them to see that they were worth it. Imagine all that authority and all that power and all that capacity deciding to serve the most intimate, ugly, inconvenient part of their lives. Imagine the impression that would give on them. That would leave on their souls for the rest of their lives. Imagine what it was like for Jesus to wash the feet of Judas. I believe Jesus knew Judas was about to sell him out. So, to Judas, Jesus was worth 30 pieces of silver. But to Jesus, Judas wasn't just worth the act of washing feet. Judas was worth the cross. So if that's your real boss and you show up tomorrow and there's the inconvenient member of your team or the demanding customer or the supervisor that you can't stand, what would it mean for you to wash their feet? And maybe that creates opportunities for you, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But imagine what value you're communicating to them. Like, even though you're not my favorite person, I just believe that you're worth loving to death. My boss proved it. And if you're here today and you've never worked for that boss, you've never lived life with that boss, I invite you to that. I invite you, whatever it is that you do, to do it with him. The thief is who comes to steal and to kill and destroy. But your real boss has come to give you life, overflowing, unstoppable life. And that relationship starts like all good relationships. It starts with a conversation. And I invite you to that conversation. If you want to, close your eyes. Everybody here, close your eyes. And that just helps you get in a space of just being present in your skin. And you can talk in a voice that only you and God can hear and simply have this conversation of, listen, I have worked all my life, Jesus. And I've had some wins, I've had some losses, but it's just not enough. I'm done working this life. Especially by myself. I am done only being satisfied with the achievements of my own capacity. I want so much more. I want freedom. I want life. And this is the most important part of the conversation. Jesus, save me from a life without you. Lead me to a life I can't have without you. Save me from a life without you and lead me to a life I can't have without you. God, for all of us, I pray that tomorrow you would bring to mind the transcendent, that beyond the org chart, those 100,000 hours or 100,000 opportunities for us to show people what you're really like. Not just a God who works, but a God who creates life, who works at redemption and resurrection, who works at compassion, who works in the mess of life to tell people what they're worth. We love you. I pray we live like it tomorrow.